thinking about fluid iron, I always brings to my mind the process of like casting, right? For example, bronze casting, which very nicely kind of brings us actually to the title of the book that we have, which is G for Gong. Gongs appeared in Southeast Asia in the late Bronze Age, and they were of course made out of this process of casting, right? Like where you have something fluid, something which is liquid, which solidifies, and most of the musical instruments in Southeast Asia were either made of bamboo or gongs or bronze, I mean. And why I bring this up as well is that, in the late Bronze Age, sort of early Iron Age, when this technique of bronze casting first becomes available, it was actually quite open, as in anyone can access this technology quite easily, right? But after some time, this technology, this technique of bronze casting becomes a specialized activity, which only the elite class, and so this is like in Bronze Age, Southeast Asia, just like 2000 plus, 3000 years ago, right? So only the elite class could afford, the surplus manpower and resources you need to create bronze instruments like gongs, right? So certain archaeologists have, discovered that the emergence of bronze instruments actually came together with the emergence of state-like structures, in Southeast Asia. So the social becomes stratified, just as bronze instruments became in circulation, and this is why many sort of pre-colonial Southeast Asian royal courts, right? Their music are all sort of bronze orchestras, right? So bronze has sort of remained a kind of courtly music, So yeah, so this is, but what has been cast, sort of fixed in stone, can always be melted down and transform into something else, right? So that, I would say, is still part of our hope with engaging the systems.
I would like to also ask something in relation to how comfortably you are moving in between different moving image genres, because I was always been fascinated by this artistic strategy you have. And I think David put it into an incredibly interesting way, put it into words, how you relate to media when he says, of course, it's just a little quote from a much broader context when he elaborates on the cosmotext techniques, but he also says that whose intermediality is non-linear, always sustaining the possibility of reversal. Its movement is not dialectical, but more like a diabolical involution. And how, when you read this, how you could relate to this kind of, I think, pretty brilliant formulation of his in the essay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think, yeah, this kind of like, I guess, slipperiness, between genres. Yeah, to be honest, I can no longer tell how much of it was something I deliberately set out to do, or it was just kind of like something that also happened along the way. But I think that for sure, it very much connects to that question of like, who is watching this work, right? Like, and also the question of the protagonist, what we had discussed earlier about it being everyone and no one. So this same slipperiness that I ask for, in the audience, I would say is also manifested in the way that I work, right? And it's interesting sometimes for me to take the same subject matter, but to kind of plug it into different fields. So for example, the triple agents, who was the leader of the Malayan Communist Party from 1939 to 1947, Laitik, was the subject of a found footage video that I made called The Nameless, which we also showed. But he's also the subject of a theatrical piece that I made, which is called The Mysterious Laitik, in which I use a robot to embody this triple agent. Right? So it's also interesting for me to take the same subject matter with my own sort of like hypothesis or reading of this subject matter, and to kind of insert it into like two, different forms, to see how the media itself, the difference in the media itself, could transform the subject matter. So I would say that by now, I no longer think about my works in relation to like medias or discipline, but they have become something that sort of like floats or is suspended between these different forms and different genres.
Let me pick up on that, if I may. In this conversation we've already had, I just want to recall two moments. One where you're saying that the people in your works are media, right? You see them as media, not as people. At least not as people in, let's say, a kind of socio-political sense of the word. You are also saying that you are constantly striving to unsettle or unseat the idea of a unitary subject position, which might be represented in an image, might also be sort of implied on the part of a viewer or audience. So I want to return actually to the essay, because in the essay I've cast media as protagonists, right? So we're getting a little bit circular here, but I've cast the media themselves as the protagonists, as a way to try to understand your work historically, or at least to try to understand the kind of history that is being channeled in your work. I'm trying to account for the fact that, as we've discovered, there is this kind of slipperiness between the one and the many, the individual and the social, the I and the every name in history, but also for the fact that in sort of denying the possibility of, or denying the privilege of, authoritative official history as, let's say, the destination of historical inquiry, you end up beyond states, right? You end up beyond nation states, either before them in some cases, maybe secreted within them, moving frictionlessly between them. And the where might as well be called Southeast Asia. But if anything belongs, historically speaking, to that terrain, it's the media. Would you say that that is too speculative an understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, could you elaborate more? Like, the last statement that you made.
Yeah, I get the sense that insofar as your people are not protagonists in the way that I've described, there is nevertheless a place. Your work nevertheless happens in a place. And this, I think, it feels to me that this is the same place in Two or Three Tigers as it was in the case of Utama all those years ago, right? I want to know what I should call that place. And it seemed to me, in putting the essay together, that place was Southeast Asia. I'm well conscious of the hazards of let's say glossing that position as a region and the geopolitical baggage that comes with that phrase. But nevertheless, it seems to me that this is what we come back to, that this is the subject position, and that if those if these media / protagonists belong anywhere, it's Southeast Asia. The interplay that's happening between different art forms, between different media, and between different narratives in your work would not make the same sense in Europe. It doesn't make the same sense in South America. You see what I'm getting at? I wonder whether that's a guide, that should be a guide to the geography of your work.
Yeah, thank you. I think that pulls out a few strands of thought, which are kind of like important to how I think about my own practice. Right? I think, I think definitely, I think it's a good question to ask, to formulate, in terms of where or what is this place. And Southeast Asia, I would say, is as good as any as a possible answer, simply because Southeast Asia in itself is a place / non-place, at the same time, right? So what I mean is, the term Southeast Asia, for example, it never existed within the region. Let's say prior to the Second World War, nobody from the region thinks of themselves as being Southeast Asians, right? So the term Southeast Asia really started circulating at the close of the Second World War, with the creation of the Southeast Asian Command by the Allied forces. Right? So for me, this notion of Southeast Asia is something totally constructed. But of course, after half a century, it has also taken on its own historical weight. So it's an object that is both real and unreal at the same time, and I would say that is its fascination for me. So it is, we could also say that it is both a place and also a kind of non-place, right? And if we look at Southeast Asia from a sort of different trajectory, it is also for me very much a kind of mediating sort of buffer. So it's important to move out of the state so that our sort of perspective is not confined to the borders, to these arbitrary borders, which is our states. But at the same time, I didn't want to take on this perspective, which was global, right? So you had the local, which is my nation state, for example, Singapore, and the opposite end of that, possibly could be the global. So for me, choosing the regional, is kind of this mid-place between these two poles. And for me, that kind of allows me certain kind of mobility of movement between these two ends. Right? So that was also something that interested me in thinking of Southeast Asia, as a place. Finally, I think as a kind of third possible proposition, what is this place? I would say this place could be nothing, could be not nothing, but nothingness. Right? And, in the last few years, I have done quite a number of projects and engaging with a group of Japanese philosophers from the who are, active from the 1920s and the 30s. They are called the Kyoto School. So the founder of the Kyoto School is a philosopher called Nishida Kitaro. And, he has this, so one of his most important kind of foundational concepts is what he calls zettai mu, which is Japanese for absolute nothingness, And his philosophy eventually develops. So he kind of deepened this concept by calling it a place, right? A topos, a place of nothingness, And this place of nothingness for him is kind of the root of Eastern philosophical systems, which for him is based on nothingness, as let's say compared to Western philosophical systems, which to him are all systems of being, right? So for him, sort of Asian systems are systems of non-being, you know. So I would say that there is something of these concepts which, you know, I have been interested in. I mean, I've been looking into both the abuse of these concepts, but also its sort of like possible potential, right? Because, you know, as any good Taoist would tell you, like emptiness is first needed before something can move, right? Before something can change, right? If, for example, if there's no empty spaces between our bones, like in our joints, we will not be capable of movement, right? So I would say this emptiness is also, you know, for me, the possibility of transformation, of metamorphosis, which I think is something quite crucial to quite a number of my works as well.